Okay, so picking up where we left off, the Taiping Rebellion was led by Hong Xiuquan, a Christian from the Guangxi province of China, and he leads a movement called the Heavenly Kingdom of Great Peace. Now, as an ethnic Chinese individual, he is trying to drive the Manchus out of China. The Manchus founded the Qing dynasty, and so they are always seen as outsiders by ethnic Chinese, just as the Mongols were seen as outsiders by the ethnic Chinese when they came in and started the Yuan dynasty. Now, the followers believe that he was the little brother of Jesus, and so this is really a Christian movement as well. The rebellion grew, and millions joined due to their discontentment with the Qing dynasty, and reforms call for abolition of private property, prohibition of foot binding, free public education, establishment of democratic political institutions, and they named Nanjing as their capital city in 1853. The government attempts to put down this rebellion, and in 1864, there's the bloodiest civil war in history, where 20 to 30 million people lost their lives. Now, in order to kind of strengthen China from all of the outsiders and the West modernizing China, there are these series of self-strengthening movements. And the Manchus, with this, lost control with fragmentation of power, and the emperors refused to adopt the reforms. Now, a well-known ruler, Cixi, she was actually a concubine of the emperor. The emperor dies, and she was able to take power for herself based on her child that she had with the emperor. She fiercely resisted the reforms. So that what the Qing do is that they secretly encourage the Boxer Rebellion in order to rid China of all Christians and foreigners. Okay, moving on to Russia. We see the series of westernization by Peter the Great. We talked about him in Unit 4. He builds a navy, he improves the military, he expanded Russia to the shores of the Baltic Sea, and he increases Russian interaction with Europe. If you remember, he creates St. Petersburg, forces the nobles to move to St. Petersburg. He wants Russia to be modernized and westernized like Western Europe. And he knows about Western Europe because he secretly went there and studied how the Western Europeans lived and what they did. I mean, he thought he was being secretive, but he was like 7 feet tall, so everybody knew it was him. They just pretended they didn't know it was him. Catherine the Great rules from 1762 to 1796, and like Peter, she wants a stronger Russia with Western technology, warm water ports. She's considered to be an an enlightened despot because she is an absolute ruler who uses Enlightenment ideals in her rule. Other enlightened despots at this time were Joseph II of Austria and Frederick II of Prussia, and we looked at what they did with the Enlightenment at the beginning of the unit, if you remember that document analysis, which I know you all loved so much. So, conservatism and reforms in Russia continued. Catherine the Great is super well educated. She supports economic development. She supports nobility, which is kind of, so we call her an enlightened despot, but she's not too keen on giving the serfs their freedom, because who's going to be supporting the Tsarina? The boyars or the nobles, and who depends on the work of the serfs? The boyars do. And so she has that to keep in mind when ruling as well. She is actually Prussian, and her husband was Russian. And so what happens is she gets married to her husband. She has her husband committed, thrown in jail. He dies there, and she takes over. So she's a bit of a boss. So Russia expands and is very strong at the end of her reign. Tsar Alexander I leads Russia to resist Napoleon in 1812. We talked about this when we learned about Napoleon. The Russians are practicing scorched earth policy, so as they retreat towards Moscow, they're burning everything, slaughtering everything, so the French can't survive. And the fact that the Russians were able to withstand the French invasion solidified Alexander I leaning towards conservatism. He supports the Congress of Vienna, and he is a member of the Holy Alliance between Austria and Prussia and Russia, so that when they meet at the Congress of Vienna, they kind of create this little Holy Alliance and say that they're going to be best friends. However, liberal ideas are still filtering into Russia. His successor, Nicholas I, faces the Decembrist revolt in 1825, which is led by Western-oriented military wanting reform. And so the way he responds to that is with lots of repression, and he crushes the rebellion. Now, in the 19th century, we have this resistance to Westernization, and so this causes a real lag in Russia in terms of industrialization, because Russia is still feudalistic during this time period, and they just don't have the means to become industrial yet. They don't have, so there's no infrastructure, there's no railroads, very limited in terms of industrialization. That leads us to the Reform era, pretty much led by Alexander II. So he looks to reform while keeping Russian traditions. He ends serfdom. Here in my chair, I'm using air quotes because, and I think that we talked about this, but he basically said serfdom will end in 49 years. So he wants to keep the boyars happy, but he wants to give the serfs their freedom. But in saying that serfdom will be over or end in 49 years, is he really ending serfdom? I mean, eventually, but not for the serfs living at that time. He also creates, pardon my pronunciation, zemistos, or political councils. So this gives voices to the voice to the middle class in the government, and they set policy for building roads and education of children. He also strengthens the army, and under his leadership, we see the construction of the Trans-Siberian Railroad. So this connects the east to the Pacific coast, and it stimulates the iron and coal industry, which there is a good amount of iron and coal in Siberia. And that's it. Hope you enjoyed this presentation.